There are a number of issues that neither John McCain nor Barack Obama want to talk about. Over 5,000 physicians signed a letter stating that a single-payer healthcare system for our country is the only morally and fiscally responsible way to organize healthcare delivery in our country. Unfortunately, you won't get single-payer from either the Democrats or the Republicans. Vote green. I'm Cynthia McKinney, and I approve this message.
Recently, I had the privilege of speaking with Cynthia McKinney, an amazing woman who served in Congress for 12 years. During her time on Capitol Hill, she gained a reputation for telling it like it is and posing the hard questions, truly speaking truth to power. Many will remember the way that she grilled Donald Rumsfeld about everything from military exercises taking place on 9/11 to tainted vaccinations that were being administered to Army personnel. She became instantly recognizable as a congresswoman of courage and character, relentlessly questioning the corruption that she was seeing firsthand during her tenure. When Cynthia McKinney posed taboo questions about child trafficking, some right under the noses of Washington officials, and the trillions of dollars missing from the budget, many thought she had truly put her career, and possibly her life, at risk. Add to that the fact that she had first-hand knowledge of the criminal nature of the Clinton Foundation, as well as other pay-to-play schemes that were being hidden in plain sight. Ms. McKinney found herself in the middle of a very dangerous situation as she challenged the very perpetrators to participate in exposing the truth. Here's the full recording of Cynthia McKinney from 2006, raising sensitive issues including the involvement of Dyncorp, which has long been associated with the child trafficking industry. Dyncorp continues in its role, contracting services to the U.S. military today despite its clear association with nefarious activities. Another testament to the way in which the corruption continues long after people like Cynthia have chosen to leave the ranks.
I thank the gentleman, the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McKinney.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I watched President Bush deliver a moving speech at the United Nations in September 2003, in which he mentioned the crisis of the sex trade. The President called for the punishment of those involved in this horrible business. But at the very moment of that speech, Dyncorp was exposed for having been involved in the buying and selling of young women and children. While all of this was going on, Dyncorp kept the Pentagon contract to administer the smallpox and anthrax vaccines and is now working on a plague vaccine through the Joint Vaccine Acquisition Program. Mr. Secretary, is it policy of the U.S. government to reward companies that traffic in women and little girls? That's my first question. My second question, Mr. Secretary, according to the Comptroller General of the United States, there are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon, to which Mr. Cooper alluded. Fiscal year 1999, $2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, $1.1 trillion missing. And DOD is the #1 reason why the government can't balance its checkbook. The Pentagon has claimed year after year that the reason it can't account for the money is because its computers don't communicate with each other. My second question, Mr. Secretary, is who has the contracts today to make those systems communicate with each other? How long have they had those contracts? And how much have the taxpayers paid for them? Finally, Mr. Secretary, after the last hearing, I thought that my office was promised a written response to my question regarding the 4 war games on September 11th. I have not yet received that response, but would like for you to respond to the questions that I've put to you today, and then I do expect the written response to my previous question, hopefully by the end of the week.
Thank you, Representative. First, the answer to your first question is no. Absolutely not. The policy of the United States government is clear, unambiguous, and opposed to the activities that you described. The second question.
Well, how do you explain the fact that Dyncorp and its successor companies have received and continue to receive government contracts?
I would have to go and find the facts, but there are laws and rules and regulations with respect to government contracts, and there are times that corporations do things they should not do, in which case they tend to be suspended for some period. There are times then that under the laws and the rules and regulations passed by the Congress and implemented by the executive branch, that corporations can get off of out of the penalty box, if you will, and be permitted to engage in contracts with the government. They're not generally not barred in perpetuity.
This company was never in the penalty box. If you could proceed to my second question, please.
The second question. I've forgotten what the second question was.
I think Ms. Jonas knows it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. I appreciate the question. I appreciate your interest in our department's financial condition, and we are working very hard on that program. I've just come back recently.
I understand that you're working hard on it, but my question was, who has the contract? How long have they had that contract, and how much money have we spent on it?
In general, we spend about $20 billion in the Department on Information Technology Systems. The accounting systems are part of that. I can get you the exact number for the record of what we spend on our current, what we call legacy systems, and those that we're moving toward.
And who has the contracts?
That would be a multitude of individuals.
Could you name some, please?
Well, I think off the top of my head, well, I would rather not. I'd rather provide that for the record.
That's not privileged information, is it?
I'm sure it's not.
Well, please.
Yeah.
And we still have time, so please.
I would be glad to provide for the record. I don't want to talk from the top of my head and be incorrect.
On your first question, I'm advised by Dr. Chu that it was not the corporation that was engaged in the activities you characterized, but I'm told it was an employee of the corporation, and it was some years ago in the Balkans that took place.
It's my understanding that it continues to take place, and
is that right?
Yes.
Well, if you can give me information to that effect,
I'm sure you are interested in all of the information that I have, and I'll be more than happy to provide it to you.
Good, thank you.
But I would also like to get information from you.
Okay.
For example, the information that I just requested about who has those contracts.
Certainly.
Let me assure the gentlelady that we'll make sure that this exchange of information takes place, and Mr. Secretary, if you can get back with us on the Dyncorp story, we'll get that to the gentlelady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll get back on both of the first two questions, but the Congresswoman has raised the other question twice now, and I'd like to have General Myers respond because you mentioned it in the last hearing, and I think it would be helpful to get the answer, even though we're on red, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
General Myers, go right ahead.
But I would like to have the answer in writing as well, as I thought my office was promised.
Okay, I don't know about the promise, Congresswoman, but could you repeat the question to make sure I'm answering the right question? This is 9/11 question.
The question was, we had 4 war games going on September 11th, and the question that I tried to pose before the Secretary had to go to lunch was whether or not the activities of the 4 war games going on September 11th actually impaired our ability to respond to the attacks.
The answer to the question is no, did not impair our response. In fact, General Eberhart, who was then the commander of North American Aerospace Defense Command, as he testified in front of the 9/11 Commission, I believe he told them that it enhanced our ability to respond, given that NORAD didn't have the overall responsibility for responding to the attacks today. That was an FAA responsibility. But they were 2 CPXs. There was 1 Department of Justice exercise that didn't have anything to do with the other 3. And there was an actual operation ongoing because there was some Russian bomber activity up near Alaska. So
let me ask you this then. Who was in charge of managing those war games?
And General, why don't you give the best answer you can here in a short period of time, and we'll. The gentlelady wants to get a written answer anyway, and then we can move on to other
The important thing
folks.
to realize is North American Aerospace Defense Command was responsible These are command post exercises. What that means is all the battle positions that are normally not filled are indeed filled. So it was an easy transition from an exercise into a real-world situation. It actually enhanced the response. Otherwise, it would take somewhere between 30 minutes and a couple of hours to fill those positions, those battle spaces, with the right staff officers.
Mr. Chairman, begging your indulgence, was September 11th declared a National Security Special Event Day?
I have to look back. I do not know. You mean after the fact or before the?
No, because of the activities going on that had been scheduled at the United Nations that day.
I'd have to go back and check. Don't know.
Thank you.
Okay. I thank the gentlelady. The chair would ask the gentleman from South Carolina to indulge us in that I should have called on Mr. Marshall here in the regular order and missed him, and the gentleman was here. So, if that is that okay, Mr. Wilson? We'll recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate Mr. Wilson's indulgence.
Well, you're going to owe him.
Probably not very much.
Before launching into the interview, I caught Cynthia in one of her more animated moments when she realized how close my studio is to the University of British Columbia, where her son attended school.
Oh, my goodness. You're in the high rent district, although all of Vancouver is a high rent district. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It's just fabulous.
I asked Cynthia to tell me a little bit about her new career.
I am teaching in Bangladesh, and today is my last day, so I'm headed there tonight. So I'm in the U.S. occasionally, but every day, that's where I am. I teach in the business school. I teach entrepreneurship, organizational development and change, and leadership. I don't know why I forgot that, because that's my PhD.
Following up on her son's educational pursuits in the law faculty, I asked Cynthia if the branch fell far from the tree when it comes to his career aspirations.
Well, actually, I think the branch has decided to go back to the roots. He came back to the U.S. for law school, which he graduated. And so he's got a JD degree, upon which, after I finished paying for his degree, he says, I'm not going to practice law. And then he decided that he wanted to do farming. So he's growing food, and I can't think of anything better. That is a skill. I mean, you know, when you think about farming and, you know, doing everything by the moon and the earth cycles, that's going like all the way back. And I think it's good. The knowledge that you gained in law school, when he needs it, he'll be able to pull it out.
I asked Cynthia to roll back the clock to her time on Capitol Hill, beginning as a starry-eyed congresswoman and culminating in her decision to disclose the corruption she was encountering on a daily basis.
It was a long time ago. I got into a lot of trouble for that. But, you know, the bottom line is that I was outraged. I walked the halls of Congress in a constant state of the political theater, to the charades, to the kabuki fighting, to you name it. I was outraged by it all. The policy priorities, the way in which special interests could just waltz in and change legislation at their whim. And you know, it's a terribly corrupt system. I was alone in trying to fight that system. And it has taken, what is it now, 11 years? 11 years later, people are coming to me and saying, yeah, now I get it, you know, but it would have been wonderful if I had been able, if people had been See, now we have the language. For example, we have the language of the 99% versus the 1%. We have the language of the system is rigged. We have this language of the pro-Israel lobby. And back then I was doing a solo, but now there's chorus. And because there's a chorus, it has caused people, the other one is the language of the fake news. So now people, because of all of this new language that has been injected into the political system, people are catching up with where I was 15 years ago. There's been a lot going on with the Clinton Foundation, but I'm only aware of the Clinton Foundation in Haiti, which is a total fraud, and the subversion of democracy, Haitian democracy, by Clinton and her henchmen who went down there and overturned an election, and about Clinton as Secretary of State and Libya. I can tell you that I have never seen the kind of corruption that I've seen with the Secretary, Hillary Clinton, and the Clinton Foundation. You know, between the two of them, the corruption, from my own experience as being inside that system, is unprecedented. It's the fact that they overturn an election in Haiti, and then her brother ends up with a gold mine in Haiti to the elimination of the kidnapping of a president. Remember that happened. Jean-Bertrand Aristide was literally kidnapped and put on a plane, and you name it. And the human trafficking, yes, because it was Hillary Clinton who was inquiring, now we know from WikiLeaks, about the woman, Laura Silsby, who was caught taking 33 Haitian kids out of Haiti. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's a little close to the situation. And this is closeness to a human trafficker. This is like unprecedented. But then when we learn about Lolita Express and Orgy Island and, Trump cabinet, the man who was supposed to drain the swamp seems to have become a swamp monster himself.
Aren't people elected to Congress to represent their constituents, to act in their best interests as a representative in Washington?
Well, my problem was that I went to Washington. What I didn't realize was that that's only, the smallest portion of the responsibilities. And, I was constantly invited to go to these parties where they did the gambling and to get on the planes and go there and to go do this and to go do that. And I watched the power of Israel inside from the very moment that you sign up as a candidate to the very end. It was Congressman Gus Savage, who was also targeted by them before I was targeted by the pro-Israel lobby, who went to the floor of the House and explained the situation that confronted him, where a person was selected to run against him because he had run afoul of them. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the New Jersey Garden Club PAC started sending thousands of dollars to his Chicago opponent. And so it was all over the country. And so he really spells out, and he did it on the floor of the House, so it's a part of the congressional record. He spells out how been subverted by this particular special interest that's extremely powerful. And, I was just thinking the other day about Jack Abramoff and what he did. And then I thought back to Abscam, and, that was the same people. And then you look at Jeffrey Epstein, and those are the same people. And so all of a sudden that has cost some people their seats in Congress because they were targeted after they had been, co-opted. And maybe that's because they didn't go along with the program all the way, or maybe they learned too much in the process of the co-optation, and so they had to be gotten rid of. And there's so many more who co-opted. And we need only go to the deposition that Sibel Edmonds gave, where she literally called names of members of Congress who had been targeted and exposed as, conducting themselves in illicit behavior. Those things didn't happen just by accident. And the question that you pose as to, what the heck is really going on and who's co-opted and who's being, coerced is a darn good question. And they might actually all fit into the Clinton scheme of things. It's not, I don't think, an accident that you've got Lindsey Graham and John McCain and Hillary Clinton. No, you're right that we need to pay attention to this, and you might have a more strategic view because you're able to step away from it. And that's why actually I've come up with this power cell idea, trying to take a strategic view to take the system back. It's a popular phrase, we want to take our country back. But how do you operationalize that, and what does that actually mean? So what I've done is I've looked at the one tactic that has operated for so long and that is successful, and that is the divide and rule tactic.
Tell me how you broke away from the divide and rule paradigm that marked the inception of the #Unrig campaign.
Well, actually, it's Paulo Freire in Pedagogy of the Oppressed who gives us not only the mechanisms of oppression, but he also provides for us the tools for liberation. So where there's manipulation and conquest and divide and rule and cultural invasion, such that we don't even realize that we're swimming in this culture, he's come up with cooperation, unity for liberation, organization, and cultural synthesis as the tools that we can use to counter these mechanisms of oppression. So what I've tried to do in #Unrig is then say, okay, or at least my vision of #Unrig is to say, okay, how can I apply Paulo Freire, Frantz Fanon's of decolonizing one's mind, because we have been saturated or infused with this culture of oppression that we don't even realize the divide and rule that is at play. So how do we eliminate that, first of all, from ourselves, from our individual selves, and then how do we eliminate that from the system at large? My vision for #Unrig came in that we could create what I chose to call power cells and bring together people from all across the political spectrum and allow them to sit at the same table and have a discussion about what the problems are, what the solutions are.
You were the presidential candidate for the Green Party. Then after the election, you came up with the idea of taking the #Unrig tour on the road. Your goal is to have people of all walks of life come together for the common purpose of getting to know each other and to unrig our political system by becoming transpartisan. How's that going?
We already did the tour, and now I'm headed back to Bangladesh to do my teaching. We are in the process now of recruiting Power Cell members and coordinators. So for those interested in joining with us, they should send a message to contact@unrig.net and let us know where they are, if they're in a congressional district or if they're in another country. I believe Jeff Gates has brought this to life in terms of what we're literally up against. That's an intergenerational, multi-generational, international crime syndicate. That's what we're up against. And so we've got to figure this thing out so that we can overcome the deep state, the 99% winning against the 1%, which are the ones that normally win.
You write about FBI whistleblower Sibel Edmonds on dissidentvoice.org. Edmonds started the national security whistleblowers movement after the repercussions she suffered when reporting criminal activity within the U.S. government. As I understand it, she was issued a gag order under the auspices of the information being classified as state secrets, yet was able to disclose her findings under oath when testifying at an unrelated trial. It seems as though the criminals carry on with impunity while people like you and Sibel are literally gagged when it comes to speaking the truth.
Sibel Edmonds has a very powerful story that she was just doing her job. For me in the Congress, I was just doing my job. And Bill Binney at the NSA just doing his job and found out that his job was not what he thought. And the people that we looked up to were the ones who were leading in the violation of our oaths of office and the betrayal of the taxpayers of the U.S. and the betrayal of our country.
And like Sibel, you started to ask some pretty tough questions. And you were joined by another pretty powerful and hard-hitting woman, your friend Catherine Austin Fitts. She started asking some tough questions as well.
At the time that I was questioning Rumsfeld about the $2.3 trillion that was missing from the DOD budget, she had already discovered that there was $1 trillion missing from the HUD budget. And so now what she has done, she focuses on the money. And one of the things that, she comes up with these sayings, one of them is crime that pays is crime that stays. So if we don't stop it, and if we don't actually bring those criminals to justice, then you're going to be saddled with even more crime. Now, when I was talking, when she and I were doing our thing, the total that we found now, because no one else in Congress has bothered to deal with this issue, she just came out with an update, a documented update, working with a professor at Michigan State University. The amount of money stolen from the U.S. taxpayers now is $18 trillion. You can go to Solari.com, SOLARI.com, and there you can find the documentation for all of the missing money. So now you wonder, okay, we just had Harvey and we just had Irma, and there's Jose and maybe even Lee barreling down the pike after those two big storms, and so you wonder about the state of infrastructure in the U.S. Well, we have money to go to war. Since you and I have been talking, the bombs are still dropping in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, you name it, the bombs are still dropping there. Syria still, but there's some some people who are now saying there's not enough money to rebuild the U.S. Well, there's 18 trillion hanging out. Somebody got it. Somebody got it.
There are trillions of dollars missing, and more importantly, there are people missing, which was an even more volatile subject when it came to confronting Rumsfeld. What gave you the courage to speak out on the issue of human trafficking, the sex trade, and exploitation, much of it taking place right under the noses of your fellow representatives?
Well, I think it's very clear that we're not protecting the children. And we're not even protecting our own children, let alone children in other parts of the world. So, for example, you've got the human trafficking where I happen to teach in Bangladesh. And I've just been contacted, actually, by a young man of Atlanta, Georgia, and was affected by a tragedy that we had, oh my gosh, when he was growing up. And it's called the Missing and Murdered Children. We never got to the bottom of exactly what happened, but there were, I think, some 20 some odd children that were missing, and some were found murdered. Today, it's sort of a mystery because there's a patsy who's been in prison this whole time, but it's pretty much sure that that person who's in prison is a patsy. So the young man who grew up at the time of around the hysteria that was going on here in Atlanta just recently reached out to me and said, you know, I want an investigation because even the parents of these, at that time, children still don't know where their kids are. There's been no closure. And so he wants to do to renew the investigation and talk to people who maybe were afraid to talk back then. And this was shortly after the Franklin, which was Oklahoma situation where young boys were being trafficked at like the local shelter for young kids, and the boys were being trafficked up to Washington, D.C., as high as Washington, D.C. So we watched with great interest as, I guess you could call them, pedophiles folded in the UK, but we have not dealt even with our own issues. And why are little girls and little boys being trafficked? And that was the point of my question to Don Rumsfeld. I was in a state of outrage at that point that Dyncorp employees, as well as United Nations employees, would be caught in women and little girls, and yet they continue to get funding from the U.S., from our tax dollars to support this. Let me tell you my own experience. Like here in Georgia, we had a young black kid in high school killed in the high school gym. This is down in South Georgia. And of course, it's racially charged. But the kid was found dead, rolled up in an exercise mat, and his organs were missing. Now, what is that? What is that? I have friends and relatives who live in Haiti, and so I watched with great interest as President Obama was sending drones to Haiti rather than food and shelter to help the people, while the Clintons and the Bushes were collecting money, and the Red Cross were collecting money that the Haitian people never saw. And the Israelis were there. And so CNN focused on the fact that the Israelis were among the first on the ground with their tent. And next to them in the tent, next to the camera in the tent on the ground, was a box of corneas. A box of corneas. The corneas. It's just, and it was captured on CNN. So then CNN comes back and says, well, we had the family members sign a document giving us authority to take the corneas. Well, I've been to Haiti. I know, I know that was nothing except that the bad guys got caught.
And then there was the vaccine issue, which also related to children and military personnel.
You know, one of the problems that I discovered when I was looking into the whole vaccine issue, and that was because this information came to me as a result of my constituent services while I was in the Congress. I was on the House Armed Services Committee. Children, children, either they were giving birth, there were problems with the birth, and then there were problems with the fetus. There were problems with the children. And so I began to look at the vaccinations, and I found they were being used as human guinea pigs, and the vaccines were administered by organizations or corporations that didn't have any business administering them. So there was the Dyncorp administration of the vaccines. Then Dyncorp joined with Portland Down over in the UK, and the ones that had authority to administer the smallpox and anthrax vaccines. Later on, as a result of what I learned with my time in the Congress on that, then it was discovered maybe about 3 years ago or so that there was a CDC whistleblower, Centers for Disease whistleblower, who found that the MMR vaccine had a statistically significant increased result in little boys in particular, that little black boys in particular, who received the MMR vaccine before a certain age. And basically it was the mixture, the M and the R all in one big giant dose that produced these, what they call autistic-like symptoms. And so, but instead of the public being warned, the MMR vaccines being stopped, the information was covered up and the vaccines were continued for another 10, 12 years. I think there's a website called Vaccine Watch. What happened was the whistleblower was an unwilling whistleblower. He didn't intend to blow the whistle. But an affected parent had a conversation with the whistleblower where the whistleblower expressed remorse for having participated in of the country, with the result being an increased number of children with autism. And so then the parent released the recording. And that, I think the whistleblower's name is William Thompson. William Thompson, I believe, is his name. Search on William Thompson CDC whistleblower, and the information should come up. All of the studies and everything. This is a CDC. So you want to put in William Thompson or Bill Thompson. You want to put in CDC, and then all of the information, and the quite devastating to the CDC. But no heads have rolled.
What role were you playing as a congresswoman when this information came to you?
I was reviewing the administration by the Pentagon of its vaccination of the soldiers, and they were experiencing health effects and birth defects as a result. And so that was the angle at which I attacked it while I was in the Congress, and that's when I learned about the cooperation between Dyncorp and Porton Down. And I said, these are not companies that should be administering vaccines. They shouldn't be forced to take those vaccines. So that was one aspect of it. And then later on, just a few years ago, which was after I left the Congress, that's when the CDC whistleblower was unmasked, to use the language du jour. And then we understood that, yeah, there were real problems with these vaccines. Let me also just put a word in for that is not solicited, but for my former colleagues in the Congress. You know, sometimes it's good people, but they're in a rotten system. And they become rotten because the system is rotten, and then we have not held them to account. So I don't want to just point the finger at them and say, okay, they did something wrong, which, yes, of course, they have done. And some of them, there are a few of them who know exactly what they're doing, and they engage in it willingly and willfully. For those people of good conscience who are trapped in a bad system, it is our engagement that can free them. So we can free ourselves and free others just by being engaged and by putting another set of eyeballs on that system.
I've always wondered if you ever got that information requested of Donald Rumsfeld in writing after you confronted him in 2006.
Here's a mistake that I made. The level of information that we have now about September 11th is vastly different than right after September 11th. And so there were 4 war games going on. Now we know that there were 8. It was like double the number. But at that time, we didn't know. The knowledge that we had was that there were only 4. So I said 4, and so I only got 4. But it was through the concerted effort of the 911 Truth community that we learned that there were more than just 4. So if I were ever able to ask a question again, I would not qualify it, and just, because there might have been, a lot more. Now, can you imagine? I can't remember now how much it was. It was 19 million to make the computers talk to each other. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense. You ask any IT specialist, and it just boggles the mind. I can't remember now the exact amount, but it was some outrageous amount of money that was spent. All I can say is that we need more eyes on taxpayer dollars. I'm sure the same thing prevails in Canada as well. And I just published on my Facebook page the photo of Trudeau with George Soros. And so whatever's going on down here, it's same things going on up in Canada too.
Clearly, Soros is behind much of the narrative that we're hearing on the mainstream media and the disruption that has taken place, particularly after the election. He and his cronies have continued to push disinformation in order to create a climate of unrest and to distract folks from the truth, the kind of truth that you're talking about here.
First, it was then, it's fascism. And when that work, it'll be something else. So anything except telling the people the truth. And at the end of the day, I think that's what makes all of the various truth movements so powerful now, is because it doesn't matter where you look, whether it's the environment or you look at the wars. The bottom line is that we need truth in every aspect of our life and in every aspect of governance. The government must be transparent to the people who pay for it.
Speaking of truth, or lack thereof, I'm curious about how the rather controversial Robert David Steele managed to get you to become part of the #Unrigged tour that we were talking about earlier in the interview.
Basically because he badgered me and badgered me and badgered me and badgered me until I said, yes, okay, I'll join you. And it's been a marvelous, wonderful, cooperative venture. We got the RV. We traveled about 7,000 miles across the country. We got stopped, of course, when the Oregon fires. So we had to cut our trip short, but we intend to take up the tour once again. We've got to build though. So we're trying to recruit PowerCell members and coordinators so that we can move #Unrigged to the next level. So we are trying to recruit as many people as we can who would like to volunteer and become a part of #Unrigged. And we're looking for at least 50 if we can't get the 435 congressional districts in the country.
How do you feel about this new phase of your life, teaching in Bangladesh?
I have a wonderful time with my beautiful students who are eager to learn, and I'm eager to teach them.
A welcome change from working on Capitol Hill.
Absolutely, 100%. What else can I say except that we, the people of the United States, have a long way to go. We have a lot of work that we need to do in order to bring the government back home where it belongs to the people.
Cynthia, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk to me today, especially since you're really on a tight schedule, and I really look forward to getting updates in the future. Thank you so much for your work, and thank you so much for everything you've done to reveal the truth and to speak up when people are simply going with the flow.
Okay, I look forward to it too, Joni.